he had so much fun racing with me and the boys, as I call it, the boys. Scott Davis, my crew chief, my great crew chief, and then my two great crew members, Brett Davis, Scott's brother, and Dave Loney. And then, of course, we had Bob Bainey and Fred Davis. They were also part of the team. We had a lot of fun. We traveled around the country. Dave was the best car owner you could ever want. We didn't want for nothing. When we went back to Bowling Green, Kentucky to race for the Hot Rod Reunion, we left with 5 24 packs of Miller Lite beer because we're known as Team Miller Lite. And that Miller Lite only made it to the first day of Bowling Green. And he says, yeah, go buy more beer, boys. So we went and bought more beer. He was the best. We had so much fun. But he was the guy that liked to sit in the background. It was not about Dave. It was about everybody having fun and putting on a good show. And that's what we did with the Tiki Warrior. So it's understandable that people thought it was my car because I was always kind of the front, you know. I got a little bit of a weight issue, so I'm a big guy. Everybody kind of notices me. But my burnouts and everything between that, and that was something that Dave and I created, the Tiki Warrior. We sat down, we said we want to do something. I love Tiki culture. Dave had a house in Hawaii. He loved the Polynesian culture. It just fit. Everything worked great. We actually ended up with 2 cars. The first one was this Northwest race cars. That was an older chassis. It had some life, so we built a new car in 2012 and ran that, as well as restoring the Jungle Gym cars and the 2 Nova twins. So I do have my own car right now. At 55 years of age, I finally achieved my dream of owning my own funny car. I picked a hell of a time to get my own car right in the middle of all this COVID monkey bunk. But I got the car put together today, pretty much made some oil pressure. We'll throw some fuel in it next week and fire it up.
Hey,
it's a blown alcohol car.
That is an accomplishment right there. I mean, seriously, a buddy of mine, I won't mention his name. He knows who he is. As a matter of fact, I'm sure he's watching right now. He went through 2.5 motors swapping into his rig. And, once you get oil pressure and it fires up and that you haven't dropped a valve, you haven't hooked any water lines up to vac lines, that is a huge accomplishment. And you chuckle because I know you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's, I've been doing, my very first drag race I went to, I was 3 months old. My folks took me to Arlington, Washington, to a drag race up there. Been around it all my life. But, it couldn't have been more appropriate the day I picked up my funny car. When I was 5 years old, I said, I want to have a funny car. I want to have my own funny car. So 50 years later, I achieved my dream. And the day I picked it up, it was nice and sunny.
Yeah.
Beautiful sunny day. Got my funny car. I got it home. I started tearing it apart. I've come completely through it to make it my own. And a few people know I'm actually sharing it right now. This is kind of the first time publicly. The car is going to be called the Sundowner. The very first funny car I ever sat in as a kid was Dale Maslin's Sundowner. It was an injected 426 Hemi Challenger bodied funny car that was back in 1971. Really cool car. It was painted by Phil Schaefer. Had this gorgeous paint job. The thing I remember as a 6-year-old boy was walking around and I saw on the deck that it had this gorgeous tropical scene of a lagoon, and there was a couple having sex right there next to the lagoon. And as a 6-year-old boy, you're going, oh, that's what it's about. Okay.
That is too funny.
The Sundowner has always been, it's kind of Ed McCullough, Ace McCullough is my hero. But the Sundowner is my name. I talked to Dale Maslin. He was thrilled to hear that name's going to be back out again.
Well, would you consider maybe letting some people come and hang out for your first fire up? Because I'm thinking back to, I don't know if you recall, but at the World of Speed, you guys were doing fired up. Was it Fired Up Sundays, where you would, I think it was once a month, you'd fire up a rig that was out there and you hit either an alcohol or a methanol injection funny car. And I remember it because it was started on gas and then it switches over, and it was just like an earthquake came rolling in. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before.
Well, when when you start a nitromethane car, very rarely, if at all, do you ever start it on nitromethane. You'll usually see people at the starting line, they'll have a bottle, they'll squirt fuel into the injector. It's gasoline. It lights really easy because nitromethane engines only have about 6.5 to 1 compression. They're very low
Right.
compression because of the fuel. And so gasoline is easily lit. It's got a very low flash point. So you use some gas to start it, and then you automatically, you'll instantly switch it over to nitromethane. Um, my car, unfortunately, got a little too much compression to run nitromethane. I'm at about 12 and a half to 1. So if I were to put nitromethane to it, I'd probably jack the heads off of it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I don't have a job right now, so I can't afford to keep putting heads on the car. So it's an alcohol car, and you just start it right away on alcohol. But we'll see. I've got a few of my neighbors around here that know that I have the car, that I know I'm gonna tell are gonna start it, and we'll see how it goes.
Are you telling
Um,
them or are you warning them?
well, I'm letting my neighbors right around my house know that I'm gonna fire the car up. I won't do it at night. I'll probably do it about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But let's just say I live south of Woodburn and north of the penitentiary, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding me.
I love that. I love that. That's so cool. Well, I tell you what, man, we've got another person asking how many of the cars that came in the museum you were able to drive. I'm going to assume this number is fairly low besides the ones that you were intimately involved with. Yes.
Yeah, you know, uh, yes, that's a fair assumption. Any of the vehicles that were from the Bainey collection, the Founders collection, myself and Scott Davis, we would drive those cars. Um, we drove them as often as we could. I was very fortunate, Mr. Bainey. I drove the Jungle Gym car at Bakersfield. I drove the Jungle Gym car at Woodburn. Not Claire's car because that was too valuable to drive. But I also drove an Indy car in Indianapolis that he had purchased, and just I got to experience things that I never thought I'd get to experience. Um, I did. There was a couple of times when some guys were like, "Ron, you got to drive my car," and it's like, okay, I would drive it. Um, but that's kind of I don't want to say it's taboo necessarily, but it's really not really professional to do that. Um, there's a liability thing when you're talking about, we've had cars in the museum that were in excess of $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
So even touching those make you nervous. And I treated every one of those cars like they were my children. People would laugh about how protective I would get of them because they're treasures. They truly are. When you're looking at a car, when you have a car in the museum that is a one of one, there's no other car like that. And people say, oh, they're just cars, but they're not that. There's something that people spent their time and their heart and their efforts to make it special. And then if it was a race car, especially, they've got incredible stories that go with them from various races, whether it was around the world, like the 1959 Testarossa that we had that raced at Nürburgring and won, or came over to the United States and was split up into pieces and lived in the backyard and bedrooms of drug dealers in Seattle. You know, they all have these incredible stories. And it's, when you think about it, cars, you know, at that level, they're not just objects, but they truly are something to really appreciate and preserve and covet somewhat.
Oh yeah, they carry history on their shoulders. It actually makes me wonder what the strangest vehicle you had come through was. Like, is there anything that stands out in your mind where you were just like, how did we even find this thing?
Wow. It's everybody asks me what's your favorite car, and it's like, yeah, I can't. That's too hard to pick.
That's why I don't ask.
The most interesting car that came through the museum. Um, we with the Mario Andretti exhibit, we had We had some pretty incredible cars. We had his little Heligas TQ midget that's a small. It had a 650cc Triumph motorcycle engine, and the TQ cars, the 3/4 midgets, were very popular back on the East Coast, and they would race 3-4 times. And that car was really unique in the fact that that was a wedding gift to Mario from his father-in-law. His father-in-law purchased the car when he and Deanne got married. And what's really interesting about it is the fact that Deanne worked as a seamstress at a blouse factory. And the money she made every week from sewing blouses went to put a new engine in that car, a rebuilt engine, because it would only last for the weekend. And if it started to smoke, they would, because they raced indoors, they would automatically disqualify him and throw him out. So every weekend he would show up with a new rebuilt engine, and it was out of her paycheck. And he won a championship, and that car really started his open wheel career. And to share that with him, he didn't even know that the car had existed. And we got it from the folks at the East Coast Motorsports Museum. He was just, when he came to the museum, he was absolutely just taken aback and thrilled. He goes, "Oh, El Duce," he called us, the number 2. And he was just over the moon thrilled to see that car and talk about that story. The other one that was cool in the Mario exhibit was the Mustang that he drove and set the land speed record with in the class. And to hear him tell the story of Deanne going for a ride with him in the car in her sundress. She had, in the 60s, very few women wore pants outfits. They all wore dresses. And she was a, proper gal that would wear a sundress. And he said she's sitting there just hanging onto the roll bar, and she wanted to see what the parachute felt like. And he says he's whistling down the salt doing about 170, and he reaches over and he pulls the ring for the parachute. And he says, all I see are her high heels and feet go right up to the dashboard. He said it was the most hilarious, and she just thought it was the funnest. We also had the Harry Irely Crosley. Harry Irely was a local gentleman, made amusement rides, also had the Volkswagen dealership here in town. And he had built this little tiny car. It looked like a clown car. It looked like something you would see at the county fair. Had a small little 4-cylinder Crosley that made maybe on a good day downhill with a tailwind 45 horsepower.
Now, can I ask you, Ron, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm almost positive those Crosley motors were an Offenhauser style. Am I wrong?
No, they were not at all Offenhauser style. Those early Crosleys, they were valve in head.
Oh, they were valve in head. Okay.
Yeah, and it was a push rod motor.
Okay.
So, but just this tiny little engine. But he built everything by hand, and he used some of his techniques that he'd done for the amusement rides. But this car raced in D at the time. I think it was D or H production. But what was incredible about this car was that it was a living testament to the history of sports car racing on the West Coast. He had all of the badges, the dash plaques that they would give, the participant plaques for events. And at the very top was Pebble Beach, 1953. He participated in one of the very first road course races at Pebble Beach. And it was through the woods there, through was a 7 Mile Drive or whatever they call it. Just incredible history. And this car is just up and down the West Coast. It was known as the little giant killer because it was so small and the car was like 800 pounds at the most. He drilled the wheels out. It was nuts just to get the weight down, but it was fairly competitive as it was at the time. And that little car has survived 70 years almost. It's incredible that it's a continuing living legacy to Harry Irely and his son Mike, who went on to some, we inducted them into the Hall of Fame last year as sports car racers.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And I'll tell you the other funny thing, going back to Mario Andretti, speaking of small things, that dude is like 3/4 scale when you see him in person. I was expecting him to be this larger than life, because he's this larger than life figure, and when I met him at World of Speed, he was everything that you would assume an F1 driver is, sort of like a jockey, but he was just, I wanted to scoop him up and stick him in my pocket.
What was amazing is that just prior to him being there, shortly after he celebrated, he's 80 years old. And Mario came on Thursday night, got into town for the race at Portland, came out to the museum on Thursday night, did a very nice, kind of a VIP dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And then he agreed to come back on Friday for the night when we had Adam Carolla for the Adam Carolla podcast. He was tired. He had left Pennsylvania at 5:00 in the morning, Pennsylvania time, flown out to the West Coast. He did not at all turn down an autograph opportunity. He would sign everybody's paper. Anybody that wanted something, he would sign it. He would spend time. He would talk to you. Couldn't be more gracious, more incredibly just a wonderful human being. Friday night, he comes to the museum after running 85 laps. He did 85 laps in the 2-seat car, giving people rides, more laps than he is old. And then he comes to the museum, and he's like a 14-year-old kid. He wants to talk. He's got all this energy. He shows up and he goes, Ron, I want to come out. I want to look at the car again. I want to go look at my Pikes Peak car. And so we go out and we look at the Pikes Peak car and we talk about it. And here I am. I'm his kid's age. I'm 55 years of age, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm just tired. This guy's like he just woke up. It's incredible. And yes, he may not be tall physically, but like when I got to spend some time with Al Unser Sr., those guys are huge. They're bigger than life.
Oh yeah. Larger than life for sure.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Not taking anything away from what the drivers do now. Whether it's an IndyCar driver, a NASCAR driver, a Formula One driver, they're very fit physically. They're very great physical specimens, but they have a lot of creature comforts and things that are afforded to them in their cars that Mario, Al, AJ, Richard Petty, all of those guys back in the 60s and the 70s didn't have. I had a chance to wheel a stock car that had no power steering as a 74 Dodge, and I could not imagine driving something like that at Bristol or Hickory. You get yourself wore out, let alone thinking about doing it in 90-degree weather. When I've been back there, and and these guys, I watch some of these guys and they complain about the heat and the exhaustion, and it's like, oh, man, these guys, they've got it easy compared to what the guys did back then. And yeah. I can't begin to even fathom what it would have been like.
Oh, just the tires alone. I mean, tire technology in the last 20 years has come so far. And yes, you don't even think about that really, but when you do think about it, it makes such a difference on the driver. I remember, I'm trying to remember who the driver was. It was for Audi in the Le Mans series here a couple of years back, but they pointed out that Le Mans drivers now, it used to be like the Mulsanne Straight. That was your time to kind of relax, your time to get set up right, switching your seat, rotate your ankles. You had a couple of moments there, even though you're going 230 miles an hour, you didn't have to be 100% vigil all the time. I think that's probably why some accidents happened there. But now in Le Mans cars, there really is no downtime. You're not saving the tires. You're not saving the brakes like they used to. You're driving 9 9/10 at all times. It's just this like, go as hard as you possibly can. And that might be why, we see so many drivers or rather so many driver changes. The days of running a 24-hour race by yourself are really kind of gone, because with the technology of vehicles now, there's no way you could go for 24 hours running that hard all the time. Although, now that I say that, you'd probably find a stasis. All the drivers would find a stasis, right?
There were always exceptions to the rule. you hear, Bruce McLaren was one of those guys when he would run the endurance races. We had um, the J Series GT40 that Mario and Bruce won the 12 hours at Sebring with, and Bruce drove 9 of those 12 hours. Mario said, I drove 3 of it. You know, it was just Bruce spent the most time. He was the one that would give the most input to about the car,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very good at that. And he said that Bruce, he said Ken Miles, he said that Mark Donahue, those guys would get in the car and you literally had to pry them out. They would stay in there as long as they possibly could. There's a race that a lot of people, hardcore car racers, know about it. That's the Bathurst 1000.
Mm-hmm.
This Australian supercar race. That is probably one of the most insane, intense races that you'll ever see. Those cars literally race on top of each other the entire race, and it's a very challenging. Bathurst is an incredibly challenging circuit.
Oh man, some
And
of the areas are they're hardly even 2 cars wide.
yeah, your line, you only have half a line because the other half is off course. It's on the dirt or something.
Right.
And these guys are carrying it full chalk going through those things. It's incredible to watch a few of those guys they'll want to race the entire race. They won't change out driver.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That is a really good point. All right, you know what? That is a cut above what I could ever hope to be. But bringing it back down a little bit to something that I can actually critique because I'm not there physically. I have a few cars that I wanted you to see, and I want you to decide whether or not they would be worthy of being in your next museum. Nick, can you go ahead and get us, no, we're not quite ready for that one. Some of these cars from the Route 66 Museum, Ron, I wanted you to take a look at here.
All right.
Producer Nick has it up. Let's make sure that Ron can see these. We're going to start with this one right here. Ron, can you see this screen?
I see you, and I see an orange car behind you.
Nick, can you go ahead and get this to the point where he can see this? Maybe share the screen. Oh, he's saying not on his side. Sorry about that. Here we go, Ron. Let's make sure that we're not doubling up on this, Producer Nick. Okay,
that's a 1936 Cord. Beautiful car. A lot of people don't realize that those Cords were front-wheel drive.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have a car like that on display. That really goes. A lot of people don't realize that Indiana was really the mecca for car manufacturing up until the war, through the 20s and 30s. And Indianapolis Motor Speedway, that speedway in 1909 was developed to showcase everything that was great about Indiana and all of their car manufacturers as a test facility. The Auburn, the Cord, those were, I've had the opportunity to ride in one of those. I'd love to drive one. They're just cool cars that have a lot of great history.
So good for a museum. I love that.
Good for a museum. Yes.
Now we've got a couple of rigs here. The one on the right is a Jaguar. The one on the left, of course, is a DeLorean. Is the DeLorean just kind of de facto going in a museum?
As a curator, I think about the story. I think about what the car can present to the public. Honestly, the Jaguar is kind of and Jag guys, don't kill me. It's kind of a pedestrian car. A lot of Jaguars were out there, and even the DeLorean. But the DeLorean was a great exercise in, I hate to say abject failure, but John DeLorean had a goal. He really wanted to do it. He set about it, and he didn't listen to some good advice. He got into some financial troubles. The car was built in Ireland. It's got some interesting history. I remember as a kid watching Johnny Carson one night, and Johnny Carson said, yeah, you go to the DeLorean factory and you get a gram of cocaine in the glove box. So, that goes back to some of the troubles that